We have good news. There are no more bye weeks. We also have bad news. There are still only 10 main slate games this week. So, guys, let's talk about how we're going to get into a relatively short slate, just like last week's. But before we do that, welcome back, John. We missed you last week, buddy. And so, as we always do, and since you missed last week, let's kick it straight to John and get us caught up with the world in Vegas.
I will talk about Vegas. I'm actually curious. Were there any major snafus last week that I missed out on? I did not watch the show.
No, we just said start every Eagle that you can possibly start. And
how dare you?
The Giants are horrible.
Devin recommended 2 UCF guys without being prompted. That was fun.
True.
They both failed. That was not fun. But other than that, no big disagreements.
The only thing I did glean was in a private chat with Ryan on Sunday. I mentioned Zay Jones for cash, and he gave me a no-go on that, and I think that came back to bite him. But ECU. Vegas. Let's talk about Vegas. As Ryan has talked about, you've got 16 games this week. You've got one being played right now as we're recording this. You've got a 3-game slate on Saturday, another game on Sunday night and Monday night, which leaves us with basically anything the NFL didn't want you to watch. They put it all on the main slate. So we've got really 2 teams to look out for at the top of the list this week. Kansas City heading down to Texas to play Houston, and Philly once again. They look really good right now. Heading over to play Justin Fields and company in Chicago. They've got a 31.8 and 28.8 implied team total, respectively, due the Chiefs and Eagles. Just below that, you've got the Dallas Cowboys, Chargers, and Bengals, all sitting around 25, 26 points. There isn't a whole lot to like in terms of shootouts this week. The games I've just mentioned, KC at Houston, Philly at Chicago, Dallas at Jacksonville, all sit somewhere between 48 and 50 points. On the lower end, in terms of targeting defenses against bad teams, you've got the Arizona Cardinals, who lost Kyler Murray for the season, going up against Denver. They don't have a whole lot going for them this year, Denver, but they do have a pretty decent defense. And you're going to see that DraftKings mispriced them, frankly. They're 2,700. I think they'll be, by Sunday, I wouldn't be surprised if they're on a quarter of tournament lineups, which brings in some game strategy discussion throughout the show. Outside of that, I would say probably 50 to 60% of the teams are somewhere between 24 to 20 points in terms of implied team totals. And so really what you're going to be looking at is the one team that's projected for 22 that somehow gets up to 28 or 32 points. That's how you win tournaments this week. And I do have some additional tournament takes, but maybe I'll save those for when we actually start talking about positions and breakdown and how values working out on the slate. But I'm happy to be back after missing a week, and looking forward to getting Devin riled up.
We always want to get Devin riled up. So, Devin, with that, why don't you kick us off at quarterback after I read a little bit of news? One, perhaps the most notable of the injury news is Mike White of the Jets. We know he got thrown around like a rag doll a little bit in that game against Buffalo last week. So he has some ribs injuries. He was limited today, Thursday, in practice. He says, no doubt, quote unquote, he will play.
He's playing.
Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson also have concussions. Neither have cleared the protocol. I don't think anyone cares, and that's the news.
I mean, this week's the easiest week of the year for cash. John, where are we going?
I agree with you. I built a cash lineup in about 3 minutes today.
Mike White is the cash game play,
yeah.
Easily, clearly. I've been saying it for the last 3 weeks. He's the guy. I don't know why people don't play him in GPPs. I don't know why people don't like to go for it. I know last week he got hurt, but he's his prop last week was it closed at 229 yards. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Mike White gets no respect. He's Rodney Dangerfield. And now he's facing Detroit, who have allowed the most. Are they still the most? They might have gotten a little bit better, but
They're
either
bad.
way, they're a bottom. Yeah, they've still allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. I think it's his job. He knows it's his job. If he can close this season out strong, there's no way he misses this game. And for them to win this game in what is turning into like kind of a must-win for both teams.
Yeah.
Because the Lions are just outside of the playoff hunt. The Jets are like clinging on to it. So I think Mike White is the clear-cut number one guy this week. If you're not comfortable with Mike White, you should probably do some more research. But Justin Herbert going up against Tennessee would be the other option at 7,200. We've talked about targeting Tennessee most of the year. Great run defense, no pass defense at all, allowing 300 yards passing per game. Yeah, 300 exactly. So they're not good. And Herbert is another guy that every game is essentially a must-win for them. So they're battling for a playoff spot, and they're starting to get healthy. So it's those two for me pretty easily.
Yeah, John, it sounds like we're all unanimous on Mike White. I know you said that as well, and I will go ahead and third that. So let's just move in then to GPPs, John, in the interest of not repeating ourselves unnecessarily. So where are you at? Where's your head at for GPPs, John?
I mean, thinking about where to bring this up, I might as well just bring it up now. I'm looking at the wide receiver position this week, and there is a slew of projected value. I won't call it value, but projected value at the lower end. You got a bunch of 3K crappers. Shout out to my man Dan Buck. And I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to get a lot of stars and scrubs in terms of builds this week, where you pay up at certain positions and you're going to end up getting very chalky, expensive guys, very chalky, cheap guys. And then the game strategy, typically the move then is to go with the mid-tier priced. And so I'm actually interested as we go through to hear how Devin's cash game ends up going, because going that cheap with Mike White, and no, I don't disagree with anything he said. 5,400, I think he's probably the best or one of the best values on the board. I just don't know there are places I want to spend up this week. As far as getting back to the GPP question, Patrick Mahomes, these guys continue to throw the ball. He's matchup proof. I think he's.
Can I pause you just for a second? You just pulled a John and you said, hey, everyone is going stars and scrubs.
Yeah. No, I didn't.
So my top GPP play is Patrick Mahomes.
What I'm saying is it's very tough not to fall into the trap. I've got 4 names written down at quarterback, and 3 of them are 5K and one of them's 8K. And I'm saying we need to have the discussion about where to go in the middle. But the most obvious to me is Patrick Mahomes. I do think he's going to go under rostered this week because people typically don't like to take him unless they've got him stacked up with Travis Kelce. Kelce will be popular. Juju's not going to be popular. MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, nobody likes him. Frankly, I don't like him either, but he does come up hot in the model this week. And I just wonder, as a 14 points favorite, folks are going to say, oh, they're not going to be in the game and he won't be throwing in the second half. But there's a part of me that thinks, hey, you could have Patrick Mahomes with 300 yards at halftime and he's gotten you the points he needs to get you. The other quarterbacks on my list, Mac Jones against Cleveland. Devin will be interested to hear your take there. The receivers come off pretty hot. Again, it's those lower salary guys.
Just
say again?
Cleveland plays Baltimore.
Why do I have Cleveland?
New England's at
Las
Vegas.
My apologies. Going up against Las Vegas. I don't know why I wrote. Oh, it's because I have an @ sign with LV after it. It looks like CLV instead of at Las Vegas. That's what you get when you're approaching 50 and still taking handwritten notes.
And can't see well, apparently.
Yes. I need another week off. Mac Jones against Las Vegas, I think, is a pretty decent play. Las Vegas is allowing over 20 points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they're about 6th worst in football. And this is a game that I think, in terms of going back and forth, could do exactly that because Las Vegas does have a decent offense. I'll stop there. Go ahead, Dev.
Yeah, my dumb brain doesn't think of a scenario. This is where it just like your GPP brain just sort of breaks mine and it turns into mush because like my simpleton brain doesn't think of a scenario where Mac Jones wins a GPP, or even outscores Mike White. So like,
Mine either.
It's just a different way of thinking. I'll go back to Herbert. I think Herbert's going to go underlooked. I mean, right now I have him at 9%. I have Mahomes actually at 12.5. I do think that your sentiment that as the week progresses, as Mike White becomes healthy and people become more comfortable with him, he's going to rise. Some of these other names are going to rise. Mahomes may fall. I think Herbert's in a really good spot. I do want to go down the list a little bit, and one of the names I'm looking at is Joe Burrow at $7,000.
I was just going to say it too.
I don't know what to do with this Tampa Bay team. I don't know if they're quitting. I don't know if they're not motivated. I still know they're in the playoff race, but like I forget who it was a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about it at Green Bay, who we were questioning whether they were still trying with Aaron Rodgers saying that he's fine with being sat. So in the Rams, same thing. I mean, their defense has fallen off. I just wonder, like, are the Buccaneers still playing for something? Because they got absolutely embarrassed last week. And it's a road favorite situation. Joe Burrow hasn't looked all that great since coming back. He's looked okay, or since getting his weapons back, I should say, with Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase looked fantastic last week, but I think he's going to go underlooked because a lot of people are going to go up to the 8Ks or go down to the 5Ks.
Yeah.
And I don't know that a lot of people are going to look at the Joe Burrow experience this week.
So in all transparency, Joe Burrow, I had a Joe Burrow, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins double stack for my big lineup all across DraftKings last week.
It's tough.
And T. Higgins pulled his hamstring on the first
snap
play, and Tyler Boyd broke his pinky on the second play, and my Sunday was done. So I'm a little burned at Joe Burrow right now, but
not his fault.
The talent is there, guys. You most certainly can make a good argument. Implied team total 24, which is about 5th highest on the slate, and no team in the NFL has more talent at the wide receiver position. So the question is whether or not Tom Brady's got any gas left in the tank and can keep that game close enough that they just don't hand it to Joe Mixon throughout the second half.
Yeah. Is there anything in this Dallas-Jacksonville game that we should be thinking about? Like, Trevor Lawrence is looking pretty darn good, but I know Dallas's defense is elite. But this is a sneaky game that, like, could it be like the Chicago game earlier where you see Dallas get out to a big lead and then Jacksonville has to throw the entire game? I don't know, but like if I look at one of these games to be like 35-31,
agree.
I know the stats of the defenses are good, but like good offenses can beat good defenses, and we've seen that before. And this game could be a shootout.
I mean, as the resident Cowboys fan, I'm of the volition that the Cowboys oftentimes play down to their competition, as we saw last week. I mean, they were 17-point favorites against the Houston Texans, and Houston scored. I mean, Houston was winning that game into the fourth quarter. So of the 3 games that are approaching the 50-point threshold at Vegas, that's the one that I think has the most upside in terms of shooting that out, because the Kansas City game and the Philly game, especially with as good as Philly has looked, those both could end up in blowouts. And I don't know that certainly Houston, I'm not sure they have the tools to keep it close. And, Justin Fields has done everything he can to keep that team in position this year, but I don't know that they have the talent. So I like the call, Devin. And I think you could stack that game up. I'm trying to think of who did jump off. Oh, Travis Etienne came out pretty hot for me. We'll talk about running backs in a moment, but he's.
What about Zay Jones?
Zay Jones is a cash game play again this week, Ryan.
No, he's not. He's never had 2 good games in a row, guys.
It's 2 out of 3, but you're right, never 2 in a row. All right, anything else we need to say at quarterbacks, or can I steer the ship?
Let's
back
move on
course. All right. Just a reminder, again, subscribe, click the like button here on YouTube for us. It definitely helps us out. It's just one small click for you, but more meaningful for us than the effort it takes for you. So thanks in advance. And guys, let's move on to running backs. And is it me, or are there actually some mildly palatable guys 6K and below this week, where normally it just looks totally yucky? John, why don't you start?
Yeah, the 2 guys that come out fairly high for me, below 6K, Zonovan Knight and Latavius Murray. Ryan and I were talking about him last week. Kind of disappointing, but
mega disappointing.
They are home favorites against the Arizona Cardinals, the toothless Arizona Cardinals, without Kyler Murray. Not that I think that he's a great player in his own right, but they're certainly a worse team without him. I think both of those guys are in play for cash games. In fact, in the lineup I built, they would both be in it. And I think the question is, who do you want to pay up for this week? And I think that the choice comes down to either Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry. I'm opting for Derrick Henry at $8,000. He's a $100 discount to Jacobs. But he's the guy that I want going up against the Chargers, who I believe are either worse or next to worse against opposing running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed on the season. And I saw Devin mouthing something, and I can only imagine it was negative.
Both.
No, it was positive.
He's paying up
playing both Jacobs.
He
paying
agrees
up
with
for
you
both
twice.
Jacobs and Henry this week.
Okay.
I'm not touching Zonovan Knight for what it's worth, and I'll let you finish, but I'll get to my reasons behind that.
I was finished.
Okay. So Detroit, we think that they're a bad run defense because of some early shenanigans that they had, where they had a 2-game stretch where Rashad Penny and Ramondre Stevenson tore them apart. However, since week 8, they have not allowed a running back to have more than 10.6 DraftKings points.
Wow.
That includes Dalvin Cook, Travis Etienne, Devin Singletary, Saquon Barkley, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, and of course AJ Dillon's in there too. That's pretty good.
Yeah. And
Zonovan Knight might be the worst on that list. I don't know if it's predictive, but it's certainly like a weird stat that they're able to shut down all of these elite running backs or upper tier running backs in some cases. Dalvin Cook had 21 yards, 23 yards on 15 carries last week. Saquon Barkley had 22 yards on 15 carries. So, like in a GPP, Zonovan Knight is, if he gets popular, he's the clearest fade for me of all time.
Yeah, it's a good call. It's a very astute observation. You're adding that second kid. You must be up at night holding the bottle.
2:30 in the morning. There's nothing else to do than to look at stat sheets. So
I guess the question I would have is it because those teams that you referenced have passing games that can? I mean, the path of least resistance through the Lions. I think we both agree, or we can all agree.
Yeah.
is through the air. There could be an argument, a counter argument to be made that those other teams have better passing games, better quarterbacks, better wide receivers.
I hate that you keep getting interrupted, John, but the Jets want to throw. The Jets don't want to run. So I get your argument, but I think that this isn't the right offense to make that argument this week. The Jets threw 20-something times in the first half of a rainstorm in Mike White's first start a few weeks ago. They threw in the snow last week and almost got the guy killed. Like they're a passing team now, which is why we like Mike White so much this week, right?
It's also fair. They threw 70% of the time last week.
Yeah. And
64% over their last 3 games, which is 7th in the NFL. All right, Donovan Knight's terrible. Zonovan Knight's a terrible play. Don't play him.
Okay, let's go on.
I don't know that he's terrible. I just don't know that I'm like going out of my way to having to start him. For me, I think that it's very clearly Henry and Jacobs this week. And then one name that I'm really looking at is Isiah Pacheco. Going up against Houston. Houston's sort of that funnel defense that the way to beat them is on the ground, and allowing 146 yards per game rushing. Is this a game where Pacheco finds the end zone? Probably. And at 5,900, I think that's a pretty strong play there. And then as a GPP play, I don't think a lot of people are going to look to Austin Ekeler at 8,500. He's incredibly expensive, but in the matchup on paper is not good because Tennessee's run defense, they're allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. But Austin Ekeler does a lot of his damage through the air. Yep. And as a GPP play, if I think about him, he could be, trying to pull it up, sub 10%. If he gets like the 6 or 7, I think he's going to be a really strong play this week.
Yeah, it was nice to see Ekeler still catch 8 for 59 last Sunday night, even with their receiving core kind of finally back at full strength. Herbert threw a ton, but against Tennessee, I think he's going to throw a ton too. So back to John's point on defense and team tendency, both of those things line up this week for Herbert to throw all over Tennessee. And we know that's where Ekeler, I could see Ekeler, punching in a rushing touchdown on 30-something yards, but also catching 8 balls for 60 and another touchdown, right? So I think that's a good play too. You're never going to really feel like you have downside playing Austin Ekeler. So let me throw out another name, guys, that's showing up high in our lineup optimizer, which if you don't have it yet, footballguys.com/DFS. Lineup optimizer has 4 sets of projections. You can fine tune it to dial in on either of those. The top 2, the average 2, the consensus, so many different ways you can mold it. But highly efficient week last week for one Tony Pollard. Might he do it again this week against the Jags? John, you said there might be something to play in that game. Is it Tony Pollard?
The guy's incredibly talented. He's just also extremely efficient. He's got 3 touchdowns on, I'm trying to do the math in my head, on 28 touches in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks prior to that, he had 2 touchdowns as well. I just think that he's almost become too efficient to the extent that there's probably some negative scoring regression that's likely to occur here. And I'm okay with somebody disputing that, right? Because the Cowboys are going to put up 26, 28 points this week. And why can't it be him? But his price has jumped. I believe last week he was 6,700. He's up to 7,100. I've got him in terms of likelihood to achieve GPP value at 3.7%.
That's not enough.
It's tough to go. He would barely make the cut to be in my player pool for mass multi-entry. So he's not the guy I would want. In that same game, though, Travis Etienne, I've got him at about 18% likely to hit GPP value. And my guess is, I don't know where Devin has him, but I guess probably between 10 to 15% Devin for Travis Etienne. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I have him at 12.2.
Yeah. So he's a pretty strong play, a leverage play against the field. I will get to this, but I like Michael Gallup this week. I think Dalton Schultz is a strong play. So, if you're thinking about stacking up the game, going a little bit contrarian against the Pollard followers, CeeDee Lamb's going to be chalky. Maybe a Michael Gallup, Dalton Schultz double stack, running it back with Travis Etienne and hoping the game stays close and goes back and forth. That's kind of how I'd like to approach that game.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you went straight from Pollard to ETN, because I mentioned the 4 sets of projections, and a lot of times these guys, they use similar methodologies, right? I mean, not just on our site, but everywhere across the industry. So you get a couple guys whose projections are within 2-3 points of each other. But it's really interesting with Pollard. Jason Wood has him projected for just over 22 points, but Justin Freeman has him for 14.6. So that's a huge delta. And then ETN is the other way for those guys. Jason has ETN 11.6. Justin has him 18.7. So really big gaps there. And I kind of agree with I agree on the low end of both of them, oddly enough, just because Pollard see that negative regression. And for me, ETN, I got to see him catch 4 or 5 balls in a game before I really go in. Now the price has gone down with those receptions, which is nice, but he's still scaring me a little bit. Devin, I think I cut you off there. So how about you give us a shot here?
2 names that I want to talk through a little bit. James Conner really confuses me. This guy's popping in everyone's projections. And
no better role though. There's no better usage right now. There really isn't.
I mean, Derrick Henry could probably say something about that, but
every snap.
Sure, but like James Conner, he was in a really good spot 2 games ago against the Chargers, and he had 25 carries. And last week in a blowout loss, he had 15 carries and 6 receptions. I know he's on the field all the time, but like, I just have a really hard time getting my head around like 20% rostered James Conner against a Denver defense that they've been extremely up and down this year. Some games they look great against the run. They completely eliminated the run against Baltimore 2 weeks ago. In other games, and they shut down Derrick Henry back in week 10. And other games, they give up 178 yards to Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. So it's just like, I don't understand this team. I think the receptions are probably a little bit false just because they were down 27-13 in the last game against New England. I don't think he's catching 6 passes again this week, but it was a season high. So most games he's 2 to 3. And if he's only catching 2 to 3 passes at 20%, I'm out.
I think that Colt McCoy is more likely to throw it to him than Kyler Murray was. You're right though. 6 was game flow. I think it's more than 3 and less than 6. How about that for a hot take?
The other, but at 6,900, it's just like, do we need the savings this week? It's not like at 6,900. I struggle with it because both Jacobs and Henry are in. Well, Jacobs just a machine in matchup proof, but Henry is just in such a good spot.
No team in the NFL on the main slate has a lower team total than the Arizona Cardinals this week. So, I mean, for him to win you a GPP, he basically has to score 2 touchdowns, which would be all the points for Arizona. And look, he could do that, but I think there are better places to go when he's also going to be. I think he's going to end up somewhere between 15 to 20% rostered.
Save 1,000 and play Pacheco, to Devin's point earlier, especially from a cash perspective. I don't know where his
The other name I wanted to just throw out there really quick is Miles Sanders, 6,500 going up against Chicago. May not be a GPP play just because he doesn't really catch passes, but you could consider him in a cash game setting. The Bears' run defense, since they've traded Roquan Smith, is one of the worst in the NFL. It might be point chasing a little bit, so I'm getting on myself because Sanders has topped 140 yards in 2 of his last 3 games, and maybe that does make him a GPP play, but I think he's in a good spot this week. Like, do we really think the Eagles need to run Jalen Hurts out there?
No.
He's probably not going to run. Just give the ball to Miles Sanders, and you have a win against Chicago.
Point chasing is tough, but I agree. If you forget about his points in the last few weeks, you still have the number 1 running back on a heavy favorite for a team that runs the ball very effectively at 6,500. Yes, agreed. John?
Yeah, I mean, Miles Sanders, the cover boy for Vegas value chart this week, because he's a very, somewhat obvious play, at least, historically speaking. The issue you're up against there is, freaking the moment that you roster Miles Sanders, they drop Boston Scott in there from the 1, and he steals your touchdowns like he did. He took 1 last week. Obviously, Miles scored 2 himself. And Sanders, as you've already talked about, point chasing, he's got 5 over the past 3 weeks. It's not a bad play. I'm not even going to pretend that it is. It's just they're a very frustrating team with Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell in terms of what they do near the red zone.
Scott did score when it was 41-14. So I don't know that completely. I understand the sentiment and the history there, especially last year. It was much, much worse. This year it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still not an ideal spot.
One more name, John. Sorry. Ramondre Stevenson got hurt Monday night. We will not talk about how much that pained me and my various fantasy teams because nobody cares. But what are we doing if he does not play? Dameon Harris has been limited in practice. He traveled with the team to Arizona Monday night, wore that ratty cutoff shirt, showing off the guns. So obviously he's healthy enough to travel. Kind of a good signal he might play. Is he worth playing this week as New England's kind of only proven running back?
What's the story with Ramondre? Do we really believe he's not playing?
The injury looked bad. He came back in, touched the ball once, limped hard, left again, and didn't come back. Limited in practice both days this week. What you read suggests it's a negative story. I guess this is really just a simple if statement, right? If he does play, you're not playing Harris. If he doesn't, are you entertaining a $5,800 Dameon Harris?
I think you have to, right? Because Las Vegas has been pretty awful against the run this year. They've given up a lot of rushing touchdowns. Just looking quickly, Cam Akers last week, 2 to Ken Walker a few weeks before that. Latavius Murray, Jonathan Taylor, 2 to Travis Etienne. So they're giving up, ample scoring, and we know that the Patriots, excuse me, I can't come up with the name. The Patriots will run the ball at you as long as they know they can beat you. So I'm fine with it. I guess I would just want to ultimately see, where they end up. But at 5,800 right now, I've only got them projected at 8.8 points, but I also have Ramondre at 14.42.
Exactly.
So if most of those points go to Dameon Harris, as I look at it and do the math, he's probably the number 1 value play at the position, because I think you'll end up at about 18 points or thereabouts. So I think it's a good point, Ryan, and it's the disadvantage of recording on Thursday night because some of these things become stale by Saturday. Yeah. But if that ends up happening and Ramondre is not practicing on Friday, Dameon Harris is going to be chalky heading into the weekend.
Yep. Devin, any other running back thoughts before we move ahead? Nope. He says nope. All right. Let's move on to wide receiver, which is a position where we have plenty of news this week. Some worthwhile. Others, Devin will tell me to stop talking about players we don't care about. So let's see how quickly that happens. But before I get there, again, please feel free to interact with us in the comments on YouTube and on Twitter. You see a couple of our Twitter handles here, so we always like when you folks reach out. Wide receivers. So back to New England. They have more injuries other than just Ramondre Stevenson. Both Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker have concussions. Myers got his 2 weeks ago. Parker got his Monday night. Neither practiced on Thursday. Does that open up a really cheap value in Nelson Aguilar, guys? Denver has a duo that's also hurt. Do we care? Cortland Sutton, Kendall Hinton, hamstrings, didn't practice Thursday. Jerry Jeudy kind of blew up the slate. We did talk about him last week, John, in your absence. Neither of us said we should play him. And then, of course, he scored 3 touchdowns. And then with the Jets, Corey Davis also has a concussion. He did not practice today, Thursday. Elijah Moore's role grew last week. So are we looking at him? He's also very cheap. Another duo situation in Cincinnati. We mentioned earlier in the show, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. T. Higgins hamstring, Tyler Boyd finger, both limited both days this week. Will they come back? And then who are we going to in Cincy? Because Hayden Hurst is also doubtful. So who the heck are they going to throw it to? Treylon Burks of Tennessee also has a concussion, has not practiced this week. And then last week's 3K crapper, Chris Moore, who showed out for everybody in Houston. Will we be playing him again this week? Because reports suggested this week that Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins would not play. However, Brandon Cooks did return to a limited practice, which is kind of weird for a veteran that wanted to be traded.
Playing.
Showing up for practice. Again, I don't think he plays because of the whole situation there. I don't think he wants to. I don't think they want him to. And so are we going back to the Chris Moore well? His price went way up. So, guys, a lot of news there to react to. Devin, feel free to take us to your plays or to, react to the news, whatever you want to do.
Starting with Chris Moore. The guy, the last really 2 weeks, he's looked pretty good. And I know he only had 46 yards against Cleveland, but he's a guy that I was joking on Twitter that he had 226 yards in I believe 2 touchdowns against Ohio State back when he was at Cincinnati. And he will forever be a breakout candidate in my mind. Yeah. And that game was in 2014. So,
so I used to write, I still do write the Baltimore Ravens training camp reports each preseason here for Football Guys. And Chris Moore, every season with the Ravens he's killing the preseason. He's going to crack the depth chart. He's going to get on the field, and it just never. So, anyways, go ahead.
But I mean, look, he's a somewhat talented receiver.
Yeah. On
a team that has no talented receivers, right? Name one other player on Houston.
Amari Rodgers.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Like Amari Rodgers and Philip Dorsett. Philip Dorsett's another guy that people have written off how many times, but we've seen Chris Moore do it, and we've seen him do it a couple times. And at 4,200, he's a guy that I'll be putting in my cash game lineups. I'm going to go back to the well here and just play Garrett Wilson, 6K. Yep. What does the guy have to do to get his price adjusted? And we talked about Mike White. I think that he's going to be incredibly popular, but he's a solid play nonetheless. I do like Keenan Allen this week at 6,800 against Tennessee. I think that they're going to look for short, quick passes against a pretty good defensive line in Tennessee. Keenan Allen has been okay since returning. He hasn't had one of those Keenan Allen games where I guess he did last week with 12 for 92, but hasn't topped 100 yards since coming back. So I think that this is a week where he could certainly do it. And for him to get 12 catches last week and it only be 6,800 is a really solid price. John, I know you have a bunch of 3K crappers this week. I'll turn it over to you, and then I will jump back in.
I'll start where you ended. Keenan Allen, I think, is arguably the best skill position. How do I put that? Are quarterback skill position players? Yeah, they probably are. But I think he's the best player on the slate in terms of value.
The best flex eligible player. How about that?
There you go. Yeah, let's do that. 28 targets over the past 2 weeks. I mean, the volume is there, and he's looking great. I think over the past, I'd have to pull it up here, but he's been back now, I think, for 4 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, 4 weeks. And he has, across those 4 weeks, 90 yards or more and or a touchdown in every game. And he's 6,800 against Tennessee, who I believe has is near the bottom in terms of points allowed against wide receivers. Yeah, they're tied for worst in the NFL.
Yeah, I have them at the bottom. Yeah.
Tied for worst in the NFL. So for me, Keenan Allen's a guy I'm slotting in at the very top of my cash game lineups and going on from there. Garrett Wilson also shows up, Devin. Chris Moore also shows up. The two names I'm not sure I heard you mention. One of them I know you're going to poo-poo. That is my man, Zay Jones. But you can't argue with what he's been doing. Zay Jones, over the same span, the last 4 weeks, he's had 8 for 68, 11 for 145. He did have a stinker against Detroit, Devin. But last week he had 8 for 77 and a touchdown, and he's 4,900. This week he's going to be in a prime place against the Cowboys, likely playing from behind. I like him at 4,900. And then I think Ryan talked about it at the top. There's nobody to catch the ball in New England this week. I know we talked about Dameon Harris being chalky, but Nelson Aguilar has got to be considered at 3,400 because somebody's got to catch the ball when they throw it. And, basically what he needs is a 5-catch for 50-yard game to get you the value you need so that you can roster Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry.
Yeah. I mean, you can make a lineup that has Jalen Hurts, Austin Ekeler, Derrick Henry, Keenan Allen, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Moore in it. I mean, you guys mentioned at the top, it's a seems like an easy week. That's not a lot of holes in that lineup.
That's why I think this is a really interesting week to build with those middle guys. If you can find some middle guys, you're going to see, I think it's going to get worse as you go into the weekend. You're going to see names like people are going to start talking about Rashid Shaheed in New Orleans. He's 3,200. Kendrick Bourne is 3,100.
I guess why?
You don't need to talk about him. We just talked about 3 other guys that are better that are cheap.
But this is the point. The point is people they're going to say, well, everybody's on Nelson Aguilar or Chris Moore. I'm going to go on him because he projects highly too.
So they're the price pivots instead of the other leverage, which is just lineup construction. Okay.
That's right. That's the point.
Devin.
Yeah.
Rashid Shaheed, thoughts?
I don't even know who Rashid Shaheed. Is he related to Rashad Salam?
It's a tremendous name, though.
I don't know what to say. I mean,
what about Elijah Moore?
No.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to double stack in a GPP with Mike White because he's going to throw for 350 yards, then sure.
That's what I'm saying.
But I mean, I just don't like, and maybe it's because I'm quickly turning into like on one pendulum, I'm the biggest Baker Mayfield hater in probably the fantasy football industry. 2, I'm probably the biggest Mike White non-Jets fan in the fantasy football industry. I've played him the last 3 weeks. I'm playing him again. I understand if you want to go up to Mahomes and deal with some of this 3K crap garbage, but they're sub 4K for a reason. And like Nelson Aguilar has more drops than I think any wide receiver in the history of the NFL. That's probably not true, but I'm allowed to make up stats since it's my show.
Thought it was our show. Jeez,
my show.
It's not Saturday, just for the record.
Yeah. Don't I talk first and last on this show?
No. It's Anyway, I think I've been on the show more than anyone on this show's history, but so I will claim it to be my show. I just don't like. What's the point? What are we doing? Yeah. Why do we need to go there? If you want to go stars and scrubs, I can understand it, but like I think in cash, there's zero reason to go under 4K. If you wanted to go like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, you probably couldn't get to Devontae Adams, but like a Jamar Chase in a GPP, then you're going to have to deal with some of this garbage. And I do think Elijah Moore is a decent pivot off of Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's still a rookie. Going up, the matchup for the Jets is still solid. Nelson Aguilar's whatever. I know that some people are claiming it's a revenge game. The guy's been cut by so many teams that I just don't even want to think about him. Valdez-Scantling is probably a pass. Yeah, it's just they're all kind of the same.
So
yeah, go ahead, John.
I mean, keeping up with this, the top 3 priced running backs: Ekeler, Jacobs, Henry. At least I have them all at 15% or higher. And then if you go to the wide receivers, the top 6 priced wide receivers, 4 of them are in double digits in terms of ownership. And I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to see that even go higher. And then these guys are also the ones that we're poo-pooing or whatever at below 4K are going to get extremely popular as well. And I guess really what we should be talking about is, of the high-priced players, who are you willing to go chalky on? And the ones that come out at the top are Devontae Adams going up against New England, Jamar Chase, they're playing Tampa Bay, Amon-Ra in that game against the Jets, and then CeeDee Lamb's going to be pretty chalky going up against Jacksonville. So of those 4, who's your favorite for GPPs?
It's Jamar Chase for me.
Yeah. I'm a big Amon-Ra guy, but this is not the week.
His price has gotten too high. I mean, 7,800 is crazy town.
Price is high and his matchup sucks.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with CeeDee Lamb of the 4.
Homer.
That's probably true.
I mean, the price is good at 73, so I can't complain too much. But
yeah,
as a boom bust guy, sure. I mean, I have the John is against the Bengals for not performing last week. I'm perpetually against the Cowboys for CeeDee Lamb's struggles this year. So,
well, with that note, one more name, and again, this is another if situation. So sorry, no clarity yet. If for whatever reason T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd can't make it this week, Trenton Irwin is another name that's going to be in that mix at 3,600. He's not great, but he's going to be heavily played, or at least.
I mean, what?
So, caught a long touchdown. He's done well in limited. I'm just saying he will be a name that you hear. So,
okay. This is my 3rd time I've given this speech this year. Everybody listening, you work hard for your money. Do not play Trenton Irwin. Don't ever play a football player named Trenton.
There has to be a football player named Trenton that's been good, but we'll get back to that later. Let's move on to tight ends. Comments. Let's move on to tight ends. I referenced earlier Hayden Hurst is doubtful per Zach Taylor to play. He has a calf injury. Dallas Goedert might return this week, at least according to him. He says he's trending in the right direction. And Pat Freiermuth did not practice Wednesday or Thursday with a foot injury. But given what's going on in Pittsburgh and with their quarterbacks, I'm not sure that that's notable at all. So, guys, what are we doing at tight end? I mean, we've talked stars and scrubs here. Up and down the price range throughout. Is tight end the same as usual? Just find the cheapest one and then worry about the other spots. Devin, that's not always your MO, so why don't you get us started?
Devin Engram this week, $3,800. I think
Talk
it's
about
pretty
point
easy.
Chasing.
It's definitely point chasing. It's 100% point chasing, but he's now elevated himself into a tier of tight ends who can obtain that point total. And I don't know that there are any tight ends. I'm trying to look through, Greg Dulcich is not going for 162 yards. It's just not going to happen.
If we never mention the name Greg Dulcich again, I'll be fine.
Guy top 4K.
Total killer.
Sub 4K. I there's not a name here that has the upside of Evan Engram. Could there be plenty of guys have the floor of Evan Engram, right? But like if I look at Gerald Everett at 4,300 or Dalton Schultz at 4,400 compared to Evan Engram, I think they're like the exact same guy. Schultz maybe a little bit safer. Freiermuth maybe a little bit safer, but I don't think either of those guys has the upside that Evan Engram does. If you want to pay up to Kelce, pay up to Kelce. He hasn't been particularly great since I started my speech about how he's dominating the tight end field, and hasn't had one of those 2 or 3 touchdown games, but it's always out there.
Yeah, it's weird. Kelce's had exactly 4 catches in the last 3 games and no more than 71 yards and only 1 touchdown. So that's a dry spell for him. So you could make an argument to play him.
Has he turned 34 yet?
I don't know. If Saturday games were included, the play would be Devin's boy, David Njoku, who essentially everything you said about Evan Engram, right? So that's why I like Engram, because you've got a floor, but you do have a ceiling in place. You have an athlete. You have a guy who's number 2 or 3 on his team's target pecking order. So I do like the Engram call there. And again, what else are you doing at tight end, John? Why don't you answer that non-rhetorical question?
I mean, for me, this position's been really strange this year. First off, you've got Travis Kelce, and then it's a huge drop off to everybody else. And quite frankly, everybody else, it's almost like a kicker. You just hope that you hit somebody from week to week. And because of that, I'm going to try to get to Kelce. I think I can with some of the value at wide receiver. If Kelce was a wide receiver, we'd play him. But because he's a tight end, we think of the opportunity cost, and we're like, well, I could get somebody and save salary and go. But if Travis Kelce was a wide receiver at 7,800, we would have been talking about him in the last segment like he's your lock and load.
I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
Like Amon, with his earlier in the year, I would agree with you. But to Ryan's point, he's been struggling a little bit. And if we think this game gets out of hand and he doesn't catch some of the early touchdowns, I don't know that I see like a 7, 8, 9 catch game. He's the same price as Amon St. Brown. He's $500 more, $500 more than CeeDee Lamb. Most weeks I would agree, like he's a great play at 7,800. I just don't know that this is the week.
Yeah, without the opponent. So where I agree with John is from a build perspective, right? We always talk about we would play him at wide receiver. The problem is there's usually not a $3,400 wide receiver that we can play when we play a $7,800 tight end. So we go the other way where we play the 7,800 wide receiver, 3,400 tight end. This week, in theory, you can do that. But yet I still don't know that it's the week because of the opponent matchup, game flow, all that.
No, I mean, guys, they've got the highest implied team total on the board, 32 points. They're going to score points. Now, is it going to be Sky Moore or Juju or MVS? I mean, you're both high on Pacheco. I mean, for me, I would rather take Travis Kelce and, Chris Moore or Nelson Aguilar than to take a chance with a mid-tier wide receiver and K. Dotton or whoever.
Engram and CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. So for me, it's Kelce. And if I can't get there, Devin mentioned the other guy I'm considering for cash, and that's Dalton Schultz. He's been, fairly consistent. And again, it's another team with a high implied team total. Dallas Cowboys at 26 points against Jacksonville. I think he had 6 catches for, 87 yards last week. He had 2 touchdowns a couple weeks prior to that. So I think he's fairly priced at 4,400.
Yeah. I also, maybe it's a hot take. I don't think Kansas City gets to 32. And maybe they don't even need to be honest. Devin, anybody we are forgetting about at tight end? The wasteland. Okay, good.
No, I think we mentioned pretty much. To your point, I don't want to hear Greg Dulcich ever again.
No, never again. Friends don't let friends play Greg Dulcich.
Tried to tell y'all.
Yeah, I still fell for it last week.
The amount of
all right.
money that's been lost on this show because of targets for tight ends with Tyler Higbee and Greg
at least
Dulcich.
Higbee was producing. Dulcich has had one game. He's had one game. One. And I didn't play him. That's the only week I haven't played him. All right, guys, let's move on to defenses where John referenced way back almost an hour ago a couple of underpriced defenses. So, we other than Denver, is there anyone else, Devin, that you're going to play in cash this week?
On DraftKings, no. I'm checking the FanDuel prices really quickly just because sometimes they're very different. I do like Carolina as I'm looking that up, going up against Pittsburgh and whoever's the quarterback for Pittsburgh, because whether it's Mason Rudolph or Mitchell Trubisky, it doesn't really matter. They're sort of the same guy, just different nameplates on the back of the jersey, both very prone to interceptions. The Panthers are more expensive on both sites, so I'm probably going Broncos on both, but I do like the Panthers in a GPP setting quite a bit this week.
John?
It's Denver clearing away for me for cash. They will be, and it's crazy, but for cash, I bet they're 65% owned. I'm not going to get away from that, but for tournaments, if they're above 15%, and they probably will be, I probably will fade them entirely. It's just the right game strategy move. And there are some other good defenses this week. I think Kansas City paying up to be contrarian for Kansas City against Houston. Houston is not as good as they showed last week against Dallas, and Kansas City can actually get after the quarterback. I could see them embarrassing that team. Philly's another one I think you can pay up for against Justin Fields. He's the one bright spot on that offense, but there's only so much he can do, and Philly's just rolling right now. And the Jets, I think the Jets against Detroit, the Jets have shown a decent defense this year. A lot of folks are
better than that. They've been quite good.
Yeah, and Jared Goff, we've targeted him in years past, and for whatever reason, he's in a better system now, better fit for his skill set. I'm still not ready to anoint him, and I think the Jets are a decent play at 3,200 for tournament play.
I like the other side of that too. I like the Lions at 3,000.
Yeah,
because we've talked about Mike White and throwing 40, 50 times a game. If you can get like a mediocre quarterback, and I know I'm all in on the Mike White stuff, and I get it, but if you can get a mediocre quarterback that's going to throw 40 to 50 times, it's sort of like the Joe Flacco effect. He might throw for 300 yards. And is there a scenario where you could stack I'm thinking crazy here because we're 58 minutes into the show, and this is where our best ideas or worst ideas come out. Is there a scenario where you could stack Mike White in the Lions defense? A pick six helps him.
I wouldn't advise it, but I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
A pick six gets him the ball back faster, right?
Right, so, exactly. Yeah. It's -1. Who cares? And he's going to have to throw more the rest of the game.
It's the old Jameis Winston thing.
Exactly.
Jameis.
Exactly.
The old Jameis. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go around for final thoughts. Before we do, since I haven't recapped any positions, I'm going to start here now, given that we have, 3 more weeks left. A new practice here where I recap all the positions at the end of the show. So those listeners maybe can fast forward to the end and hear the picks real fast. So back to quarterbacks. Mike White, unanimous cash play. John mentioned Mahomes in a GPP, but check back on the ownership there because of the whole Stars and Scrubs build. Devin offered Justin Herbert, I believe, as a cash game alternative, and Joe Burrow GPP. Back to running backs. John said Latavius Murray, cheap option. Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry. Devin said get both of those guys in. Absolutely do not play Zonovan Knight. He also liked Isiah Pacheco, Miles Sanders. John called Keenan Allen the best flex eligible player on the slate. Also likes Nelson Aguilar. Devin's going back to Chris Moore and Garrett Wilson, and also liked Keenan Allen. And then at tight end, it was just, it's a wasteland. It's Evan Engram or Travis Kelce, big or small. So those are our picks at the skill positions. John, why don't you lead us off with some final thoughts?
All right. My final thought, there are a couple guys I didn't talk about over the course of the show. And one of them is what I would call a secondary stack. So from a roster construction perspective, you hear us talk a lot about taking a primary stack or a double stack and running it back with somebody on the other team, and do that. But another way of building additional correlation into your lineup is to take another game that you think, let's say the Kansas City Chiefs, you think they're going to score a lot of points. Take 2 Kansas City Chiefs on one side, or take, in some cases, a player from each team that are opposite one another that you think are decent value. And for me this week, I like Dante Foreman against Pittsburgh. This guy is getting loaded in terms of volume over the past few weeks. They love to feed him the ball. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they've got a decent front seven. I don't know. Ryan knows more about
run
them.
Defense is horrible.
Okay.
Baltimore's third quarterback was in last week, and everybody knew they were going to run, and J.K. Dobbins on one knee.
All right. Well, it doesn't change my pick. I thought maybe you might roll your nose at it. I'm gun shy on this show.
I like it a lot.
Dante Foreman's 5,400. And I want you to quote, run it back on the other side with Deontay. Deontay Johnson hasn't scored a touchdown all season, coming off a year where he scored 8 and 7 the year before. He's due for some positive touchdown regression. And the Carolina Panthers are not a team to be afraid of in terms of defense. That combination is going to cost you $10,500. If they get you 35 points, you're extremely happy, and both of them are going to be sub 5% owned. So that's just my parting thoughts.
You had me at Foreman, you lost me at Johnson. Devin?
I'm speechless.
Please.
No, I'm good.
Devin's good. All right.
Deontay Johnson has 15 red zone targets, so I do believe that if there is a player who will have some positive regression, he could be a guy that if he's like plus 200 or higher on a prop, you may want to look at.
He banged the drum for Mason Rudolph to start over Mitch Trubisky today. So
Miles Garrett banged a helmet on Mason Rudolph's head. So
that is true. On that note, let's close the show. So once again, please check out our content at footballguys.com. I mentioned the lineup optimizer today, but there's also plenty of good articles written by 2 of the 3 of us here, and not me, the other 2 that are very good at what they do. So on behalf of those 2, who are John Lee and Devin Knotts, I'm Ryan Hester saying thank you for watching, and thanks for being a football guy.